Good morning. As many of you know, I have a 2-year-old son, and living with a young human being makes me aware of a feeling that I've had for many years. I imagine conversations that I will have with him when he is a teenager or a young adult. And I think it's quite likely that he will despise me. And I don't mean, there's always psychological limitations that parents have, so there's always conflict between, children and young adults and their parents, because these young people just see the limitations in their parents and the effects that those limitations have had on their growing up and so forth. So there will be accusations and tension, and I think that's it's always been like that. But I think we're living in a time where something else is going on in a dimension that I think hasn't existed before. It's like we have to face the fact, this is my opinion, that this next generation, like my son, and also young people who are already alive and older, look at people like me and you as having completely failed. Not just individually, but collectively, and not just, on the level of one country, but globally. In degrading ecological systems of our world in such a way that the quality of life for young people and future generations is going to be seriously diminished. And I think these future generations will despise us for it. So, in imagining this situation, if we live that long, my son and I just ask myself, how will it be possible to maintain a certain, level of self-respect and dignity. In other words, what can be done now? What can I do now to be able to maintain self-respect and dignity? So it's not tied to the conversation that I'm imagining. It's just a general question of how do we want to hold ourselves in this situation? And what kind of mental posture is necessary to maintain and cultivate. So, I don't want to go into explaining how I see, or not too much explaining how I see our global situation, but just, the reason I think younger generations will despise us or are already despising us is because the science of global warming started in the late 1800s. And since the 1980s, there is scientific consensus that we are heading for a catastrophic warming if things don't get turned around. People have ignored this for a long time for understandable reasons, but it is that way. We trust scientific results and predictions in all kinds of other areas. There's no reason we should be more doubtful about what has emerged as a scientific consensus in this arena. But I say it's understandable because there is a lack of perceptual immediacy in many of these processes. Like it's difficult for us to perceive the warming. So according to the UN report on climate that come out, rather frequently, we need to achieve net zero carbon, a net zero carbon world, global society, by 2030 to avert catastrophic consequences. Now, I ask you, if you're intellectually honest and you think and feel what the world is like, do you think that this is an achievable goal? There's some shaking of heads, and I'll just give you my opinion. I think it's not achievable. If this is true, that it's not achievable, there will be catastrophic consequences. It's very probable that there will be catastrophic consequences. Okay? So I think this is important to sit with this and to stop being sort of, practice some expedient optimism. I know optimism feels better to people, but, I think it's just not intellectually honest. But, that doesn't mean we have to be pessimistic either, if pessimism means to assume the worst results. My practice is pragmatism, which is sort of neither optimistic nor pessimistic. And what does it mean to be pragmatic in this situation? I think it means to vote for politicians who make it a top priority to create, let me just say it, a green society. And that means, reduce carbon emissions drastically, stop polluting the world with toxins, and stop destroying habitat for us, and do everything we can to slow species extinction. Second, support organizations who are devoted to these kinds of intentions. Maybe consider being an activist yourself if you have that in your wheelhouse, or you have the emotional stability to do such a thing. Change, the third point, being pragmatic, change our personal lifestyles to achieve in our personal life circumstances net zero carbon emissions by 2030. And fourth, help build a culture of transformation. And this is what I want to talk about today. A culture of transformation. Now, we need transformation in the, let's say, so-called external world. We need, as I just said, we need to urgently stop carbon emissions. We need to stop pollution. We need to stop the destruction of habitat. We need to, in order to, and this has lots of implications on a societal level, we need to have social transformation too in order to be able to achieve these goals. To give an example, we really seriously need to look at the inequality of a standard of living, because if we don't, then there will be, billions of people who can't participate in this process. But we're dealing with inertia. This is the biggest problem. Inertia is the biggest problem. And inertia happens, I think, in a fourfold way. There is the inertia of physical systems. Like, to give an example, the oceans absorb heat from the atmosphere in a very slow manner, and so we are experiencing the consequences of warming that has been caused hundreds of years ago. And if we stop emissions today, that's not going to help us immediately, because the oceans will continue to absorb heat and melt ice and make sea levels rise. So what we usually have as an experience is like, I do something and then there's an effect. It's not available to us in this situation. People underestimate this dramatically, I think. Because the perceptual immediacy for this situation is lacking in our sensory apparatus. And the way we can know about it through the collection of data and measurements, and then putting this into mathematical equations and putting it into computer models, is just too abstract for people. So this is a serious problem. Then there's the inertia of ecological systems. In other words, they're quickly destroyed, but take forever to recover. Or will never recover with species extinction. Once a species is gone, it's not going to come back. Not in any human scale, and factually, I think it's not conceivable in the process of evolution that the same species will exist again. This is permanent death. And then there is societal inertia, and you can see it's very frustrating. It's like how long it takes to build, particularly in open democratic societies, to build a societal consensus, and then out of that consensus to find collective action that is effective. We're witnessing this all the time right now. Right? It's a very inert system, and so people get frustrated for different reasons with this open democratic society, and it is in danger of collapsing, I think. And then finally, and this is maybe the most relevant topic here for this context, is we're dealing with mental inertia. And we can observe it in ourselves. The inertia of our own minds. We have trouble changing the smallest habits in our own life. The smallest habits. We are stuck in, psychological and emotional patterns where just, our ego-centered lives are so much more important than what is, forgive me to be so sloppy in my speech, what's really important. Of course, how we feel is really important, but we have to, it seems like with our mental inertia, we have to disregard these like massive problems because we're constantly just taking care of ourselves in this seemingly petty way. But this is just one side of my view, which is the harsh view that I think future generations will have on us. What I think in the building and developing of a culture of transformation, one of the most important resources in the future will be self-compassion. What I mean by that is, the ability to look deeply into the limitations of our own mind and in the limitations of our societies, and having explored deeply those limitations, practice self-compassion with ourselves for being the beings that we are. So to spell this out in this imagined conversation that I have with my son, but look, this isn't about me and my son. We're going to have this conversation on a massive global scale between generations. I'm just making it personal to give myself a clearer feeling of it. So even if you don't have children, you will have this conversation. I hope that it's possible for me to maintain a certain level of self-respect and dignity, as I said, if I can say these are the things that I have actually done. And those are better some things that deserve respect. And these are the limitations that I have encountered in the process. And through the practice of self-compassion, having come face to face with these limitations, I've just pointed this out, the inertia, the dimensions of inertia that we're dealing with. The best we can do is hope for the compassion of others. Now, I think this is a huge project to conceive of, imagine, develop, and then maybe build and practice what I'm just preliminarily call a culture of transformation. This culture of transformation has an external dimension of like all the things we need to do to respond to the crisis. It has an internal dimension, and it remains to be seen how these two are connected, or whether a practice of internal transformation can help with the process of this external transformation. But I think the centerpiece of this culture of transformation and the inner dimension of it is what I call the field of mind. Now, some people might talk about what I call the field of mind. They might talk about this as non-dual awareness or pure consciousness. And what is it? There's, I think, basically two views on it. It's like, it's the result of a long process of cultivating attention. The realization of what I'm just naming the field of mind. To have this as your own experience is the result of a long process of cultivating attention. That's one view. The other view is that it's accessible to you right now. There's no separation between you and the field of mind. None whatsoever. How do you test this in your own experience. I think both views are true, actually. Dogen said, speaking to his students, he said, I deeply wish for all of you to be constantly intimate with your field of mind. I wish for all of you to be constantly intimate with your field of mind. This is his deepest wish. This is the best he can hope for his fellow human beings. So, you can see that in a statement like this, there's a practice instruction. Discover what the field of mind is. Become intimate with it and practice it in a continuous way. The discovery of the field of mind is ready at hand. It's like you need to explore the question, what is aware? And you don't want to answer it with a concept. Because that answer is very simple. What is aware? Awareness is aware. So that's easy to give a conceptual answer. No, we need an experiential answer. And the experiential answer is practiced by, you can do it right now if you let your attention spread into your visual field and in your oral field, seeing what you're seeing, hearing what you're hearing, feeling what you're feeling proprioceptively in your body. You can ask yourself, what is aware of all these appearances? And I think it might be difficult for you to just actually know where to go in your experience. If you knew where to go in your experience, it would be very obvious. So many of you know where to go in your experience, and what you find, I think, is a kind of presence. A presence that presences everything. It's like the medium of awareness or mind, or some people would say consciousness. I prefer the words awareness and mind. The medium of awareness is that through which everything appears. I call this aliveness too because it's this most basic sense of existence. It's like this is how everything exists. In your own experience, not as a description that physics would deliver or biology would deliver. It's just our direct experience of how things manifest. And they manifest through the field of mind, through awareness. The reason we feel we don't have direct access to this fundamental aliveness and presence in our life is because attention. I just told you, spread your attention to let all of this that appears visually and orally and proprioceptively, let all of this be there. The reason this doesn't seem to be very accessible is because attention is deeply entangled with the contents of mind. Attention is deeply entangled with the thought process that is going on in our minds all the time. And attention is deeply entangled with the appearances as things that we desire and reject. So we stage our life as a struggle for getting stuff we want and getting away from stuff we don't want and from believing our thoughts. And because attention is so absorbed into this struggle, it's not available to be, as Dogen says, intimate with the field of mind. So even though this field, the field, what I call the field of mind, is accessible to us at all times, it is also inaccessible because of our deeply ingrained habits of attention and the entanglement of that attention into thoughts and things. So there is also that process, that long, somewhat difficult process of cultivation to examine and let go of that entanglement or unentangle attention. It takes effort and clarity of mind to engage in that process. So you could say, you have to go through a process of cultivating attention, disentangling it, so that you get a chance of tasting directly what it means to speak of a field of mind or the awareness of awareness, and these spiritual phrases that either make immediate sense or are kind of like, huh? Or you could say, well, by accident or by chance or during a retreat, you get a taste, because the accessibility is there of this field of mind. But then you still need a process of bringing this experience and perspective into the details and nuances of your life and start this process of disentanglement. Now, some people, I can feel the objection in to what I'm saying of like, oh, okay, so on the one hand, you lay out the global dimension of our ecological crisis, and then you say at the center of it is the cultivation of the field of mind. Well, really? Like, what are we hoping for? That, like, nearly 8 billion people we are right now, all go through a spiritual awakening and, live their lives from the experience and perspective of being continuously intimate with their field of mind, as Dogen is wishing. It's like we're waiting for that. Talk about inertia. Right? But, and this is why this dimension of having these conversations with your children or your future or future generations is so important. Even if we fail as a global collective of human beings, which I think is more likely than not, it will be important how you are holding yourself in that situation. How you maintain your own mental health, and more importantly, your self-respect and dignity. So, to live your life from the realization of this continuous intimacy with the field of mind is never going to be wrong. It's, it's the right thing to do. And it may be depending on how bad the situation becomes, it may be quite important. And I want to point out why. Well, first of all, the experience of the field of mind has certain qualities. And they're quite marvelous. Because there's a kind of peace there that is unconditional. And there's a joy, specifically the joy of being alive for no other reason than being alive. And just talking about it, it makes me smile. And when things get bad, and we can know this in our personal life, when things get bad, when you have that as a resource, in the midst of grief, in the midst of, struggle, you can feel the joy of being alive for no other reason than being alive, even though life is hard. This will be, in a ecologically degrading world, this will be an enormously important resource to maintain sanity. Because the people who don't maintain sanity in that situation will, go to war with each other, and we will all be affected by that. Emotional war and actual war. Now, I think it's important for another reason, because this being intimate with the field of mind is the centerpiece of liberation from suffering. And I've said this so many times, I'm almost embarrassed to say it again. Not liberation from pain, liberation from suffering. The ability to release and be able to live with pain is the Buddhist vision of liberation from suffering. We will need this big time, this ability in order to live in an ecologically degraded world, because our standard of living externally will be diminished. What will it be like to have the resource, to not fight this? To accept it as a fact of life. Just like when you become sick in a serious way, or not so serious way, just with a cold or a flu or, a global pandemic, how terrible that is, things are taken away from us. This does not instill me with confidence. The people reacted to the impositions that were placed on them in a global pandemic. Wait for the impositions that are to come. It's if that creates so much upheaval in our society, I really think people are not prepared. So I'm just giving that as an example of to live with pain and inconvenience and discomfort and difficulty. Now, if you have this added, bonus of the joy of being alive for no other reason than being alive, it's there's a vision I have of not needing so much. If it's satisfying just to be alive, like maybe you don't need certain things. Like you can, this is like, I have a real positive vision of a culture of renunciation, of like, well, we can be okay without all this stuff that we consider so necessary. So it's okay to have stuff, you know, I enjoy it, but when you can't have it, can you still be okay? This is what I'm talking about. This will be an important resource. This intimacy with the field of mind also provides a very direct sense of connection, of being not separate from other beings. Zen Master Fayan said, "You should all understand that the myriad beings are your own self. Look, you are right now arising within I put air quotes around this for those who listen to the audio recording, my field of mind. You are all arising in my field of mind, and I know that I am arising in your field of mind. All beings are arising within everybody's field of mind. That is intimacy. Our aliveness always emerges together with all beings. You should understand that the 10,000 beings, the myriad beings, the infinite number of beings are your own self, undivided from your own aliveness. To have at least the perspective of that, even if it's not a deeply held experience, just to live from that perspective is, I think, allows us to have actual compassion and respect others in their existence, and not just continue systems of destructions of life. I know there's inertia, and it's difficult to know how to do that, but it's important to cultivate a mental posture from which you know deeply that you do not want to participate in it. And then finally, I think this intimacy with the field of mind gives us the strength to do the right thing, even if we cannot hope to have positive outcomes. Been speaking about, an appropriate response to the circumstances that we encounter. It's like, what's standing in the way of giving an appropriate response? It will feel more nourishing to give that appropriate response than to not give it. So we can develop a kind of culture it's a virtuous culture of doing what needs to be done, even if we are doing it in a context of collective failure. Because when you do what needs to be done, even though there is collective failure, you can have this conversation. So, I can see certain things, that we can do as practitioners and as a Sangha. Like I said, we can all establish a zero carbon lifestyle for ourselves in the next 7 years. And I want to emphasize again, I did it in Crestone and I need a little time to land here, but I would like to start this process for the Boulder Zen Center. Just to give an example that an organization can actually do this process. And, like I said, to maintain self-respect. Okay. Thank you for listening to this difficult topic. I think it's important for us to become more comfortable to speak about it. I don't mean comfortable in terms of our emotions, but articulate and versed in facing what's really going on.